Welcome to the TCG Compass podcast, presented by Amber Grading, a mostly weekly discussion on trading card games and the people who love them.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by my co-host, Grant.
Hi there.
In today's show, we're going to talk about what it's like being a reseller and a buyer of cards online.
Right. What it takes to be a seller, what different platforms there are, what customers should know, and what we love and hate as customers ourselves.
Exactly. So, Grant, did you start as a reseller online with TCGs, or did you sell something else first?
Mostly TCGs, definitely did some yard sale, garage sale stuff, but most of it was, got a bunch of extra cards lying around that have a good bit of value. Now would be a good time to sell it kind of thing, and just kind of went from there.
Awesome. Did you start on eBay or TCG Player or?
I would say a lot of it were Facebook groups. Did a little bit on eBay, but the fees, are kind of like the tricky part. And then, being a smaller eBay store, you just don't get as much traction as someone who has a long history of selling singles.
Yeah, exactly. And just as a note, we're not promoting or representing any of these companies that we mentioned. We're not affiliated with them at all. But I started with selling online in 2003. It was my first year of college. And I would go to local resale stores and buy video games, vintage video games and strategy guides, things that I knew had value. And I'd buy them for really cheap and throw them online. And I basically would survived a couple semesters just doing this a few times a week. So Grant, what did you learn as a reseller on Facebook?
I think the biggest thing I've learned over all these years is setting the right expectation. So I try to go above and beyond, especially for the higher end cards, right? Anything above $100, $150, I'll have high resolution photos of everything. I'll actually point out the flaws that I see on the card to make sure that the buyer or the potential buyer is, in the loop on things that I personally think are problematic with it, whether it's a dinged corner, whether it's a scuffed surface. Scuffed surfaces, I think, is one of the things that is the hardest to know whether or not, especially an older card has, just because you kind of need the light to hit the surface right at the right angle, and then you kind of need to tilt your camera at a pretty heavy angle to see it. So it's those types of things. I'll often take videos of the card too, to both be able to see the edges and the corners, but also the surface. And, I'll kind of manipulate the light source that I use so people can see it. So I think that's super important kind of in the promotion of what you're trying to sell, but also when it comes to the shipping and things, giving your buyer an accurate idea of, because I am selling from Hawaii, so our shipping options, even though it says 3 to 5 days, sometimes takes over a week to get there. So just having that honest conversation with the buyer to say hey, this is the service that I'm using. If we want to go up a service, that's fine. I'll usually split the cost 50-50 with them, and kind of go from there. And then that way I'll even let them know, even with the tracking, right? I'll say hey, I see that it hit this distribution center. I'm estimating it'll get there in the next 2-3 days or whatnot, just based on, the experience I've had. How about you?
Right. Yeah. A note on that shipping aspect. I found that in some cases, it doesn't matter how fast you get it to the post office or to FedEx. Mm-hmm. Some customers will just complain because it takes a while. In some cases, I've had to show them that, I dropped it off within hours of them paying for it. And I couldn't have gotten it there any faster, and the fact that it's taking a while now is not something that I can change, and it's a little frustrating in that aspect. But it sounds like you've had a similar experience as I have. I use TCG Player quite a bit. I use eBay quite a bit. I do like Facebook because I think it's lack of better words, it's a more intimate process for the seller and for you. They get more information, they can ask questions. But also when you're selling a lot of stuff online, Facebook can make things a little harder because sometimes you get people who just want to have conversations and talk about stuff. And sometimes they want really intricate images of cards that are, very low value. Mm-hmm. And, you end up spending an hour talking to somebody to sell a $30 card. And and then they end up wanting like a really super big discount, and it's just like, I'll just throw it on TCG Player and tell them, this is LP or this is, moderately played, because at the end of the day, like when I see MP, I know the card's going to be kind of beat up. I know it's not going to be in perfect condition, and that's fine because it's going to a sleeve, going to a deck, and want to play with it. But have you ever sold on TCG Player?
A little bit. For me, I think it was just because I don't put a large inventory up there. Mostly because I know the inventory management part is always hard, especially if you don't have a system like a store would. It's just not as it's just a different selling process, and I kind of like the haggling aspect on Facebook, and I don't really mind it too much. So I stick to the Facebook groups. I feel like it because I have a lot of niche things. I think that's a good place to sell it, because you kind of know from that point moving forward who the audience is, and I might pick something up and I'll be like, hey, I can skip the whole process altogether and just offer it up to them before it goes up for normal sale. And so I'll have like Japanese reserve list foils or something, or APAC lands, or just things that aren't for the average buyer, but through the Facebook groups, you'll find these people who are, this little tight-knit community who's looking for these oddities and things like that. So, that's what I like about Facebook, is you have that interaction, whereas on TCG Player, someone buys it and you ship it and they receive it, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, specifically for like foreign cards, like they'll probably never move on TCG Player, but you throw them into like a foreign MTG group, you'll probably get good results. Same with like signed cards, like most people on TCG Player are not looking for signed cards. They're just looking for something to jam in their deck and play with. And a lot of people on TCG Player are just looking for, a cheapest option for their deck. They're not necessarily looking for like a collector's version or an oddity or anything like that. So it's like you said, you kind of like playing to your group. So TCG Player offers some really great tools for resellers if you're doing like bulk uploads or like large inventories. But what I've been finding out recently is that there's a lot of nuance, an increasing amount of nuance between different sets and cards, and those tools are not that great at determining which ones you want. A good example is the top 8 collected companies. There's 2 different versions of that, and there's only like one that has a little stamp on it, one that doesn't. And what I really love that card, and I was ordering a bunch of them, and what I was finding is like sometimes I'd get the stamp for the cheaper one, and sometimes I'd order the expensive one that's supposed to have a stamp, and it wasn't there, and the stores were like, well, sorry, the upload tool doesn't know the difference, so it just jams them into one.
Yeah, and I think even when the etched foiling first got announced, right, even before the set came out, the local game store owners that we talked to and the people who sell on TCG were really concerned that having these new variations, we're going to add a level of complexity that would make selling them a lot harder, where, not only are there mistakes on the classification of the card going into, online marketplaces, but also what you're receiving on the back end. And it's just like, it's it's tough when you have so many different variations out there, whether they're from promo packs or etched foiling, from collector boosters to pack foiling to full arts to, it just gets kind of difficult. So, I don't know if there's ever going to be a tool to recognize those things like right off the bat, like scanning them in and whatnot. But yeah, definitely inventory management, right? That's the tough part, where if you're targeting a dozen cards and selling them on a Facebook group, less mistakes are, bound to happen just because the pool of cards you're working with is smaller. Whereas if you're doing, 150 card upload to an online, site, then it starts to get a little bit unwieldy to have to drill down to the exact printing of a card.
Well, that's the thing, is when you list it on a Facebook group, the people in there are going to know what they're looking for, know what they want. And if you upload an etched foil, they're going to ask for photos of like it under different lights so I can see the texture of the surface. And, it's harder to make that mistake. Whereas on TCG Player, you can upload photos, but it's not always the case. And then what a lot of people do on eBay too is they'll upload like generic photos, and that doesn't really help either. eBay's a cool like in between for the two, because a diligent seller will actually upload photos of what they're trying to sell, but a lot of them don't. And then the other problem I have with like Facebook groups and stuff is there's a lot of discrepancy in between like what near mint is or what mint is or what like plate is. And on these other sites, it's like they have a really clear criteria. And a couple times I've received cards that I ordered that were light play, and to my standards, they're not light play, but then I compare it up against the standards for TCG play, and I'm like, okay, well, it meets these criteria, so I'm not going to say anything. What is your experience with shipping cards online? So whether it might be through Facebook, have you noticed any discrepancies between the different communities, whether it be like Pokemon or Magic or other games?
I think the biggest oddity is Magic sales on Facebook have a completely different way of dealing with shipping. So, when I'm selling Pokemon or sports cards, the expectation is, as me as a seller, I provide the shipping either built into the cost or, say what service I'm using. And as the buyer, you just accept those terms, as a whole. Where in Magic, like you'll see posts saying like, add 50 cents for plain white envelope shipping, add $4 for tracked USPS, and then insurance is on you or insurance is split or whatnot. So like it's weird that in Magic, the shipping is either pushed onto the buyer or split with the buyer, where everything, in every other instance of selling cards online, it's either absorbed by the seller or, the terms are just laid out up front saying like, this is how it's going to get shipped to you and this is how much the card is. So in my eyes, that's like when other communities will react to like a shipping dispute on a Magic thing, they're like, literally in every other community, the shipping is on the seller. It's your job as a seller to ensure that the card gets safely to the buyer.
Does that carry true for like PayPal fees or insurance or things like that? Is that also the case? Yep,
it's all built in. And granted, like in these other card games, I feel like there's better margin on a lot of things. So it's kind of like built into that, regard where, say in sports cards, like you're buying a rookie card that's going for like $200. Like losing $4 on shipping isn't going to make or break you. Where,
it's not a big deal.
In Magic, the margins are a lot thinner a lot of times, especially if you're an aggressive buy lister. When you're buying, the shipping can kind of make or break you, which is why I think a lot of people are concerned now that the post office or USPS is changing the way that they're metering cards and which stamps you need to put on your envelopes, kind of going forward, because a lot of people are getting return to sender saying there's insufficient postage on things that are semi-rigid or rigid, where in the past it kind of like slid through most of the time.
You mean because they're not putting the do not bend or the non-machinable stamp on there? Yeah, so I've been using the non-machinable stamp for a long time because I actually had some of my stuff get sent back several years ago. It's not that much more expensive. The one hang up is that your cards do take longer to arrive because they can't be machine processed. So, I mean, somebody has to physically look at them and sort them. And so when a normal card might take a week to get to the East Coast, now it takes like 10 or 15 days. So it's a little bit worse for the customer. And obviously, makes you look worse because things are going slower. But it does give a level of security that your card isn't going to go through a machine that could destroy it, which happens sometimes. That said, I think that the non-machinable cards do have a higher chance of being lost. But when I started really getting into reselling, I would always ship stuff with tracking. If it was like more than $20, it was shipped with tracking. And then I decided to do the math on it one day, and for $3.50, or rather $3 more for every single package that you ship tracked, you would need to lose quite a few of those orders to make up for that extra cost. And what I found is that USPS is pretty reliable. Historically, for me, they might lose maybe 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 orders that I place. So it allowed me to up my threshold on what I put tracking on. And if you think about it, if you ship 1,000 orders and you put $3 tracking on all of those, that's $3,000 that you're paying for the potential loss of one or two of those orders. So as long as those two orders aren't worth more than $1,500 each, you're probably safer, or you're going to make more money if you just do plain white envelope for anything that's less than $50. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for the lower price cards, I think it's fine. Like you said, it's a numbers game, especially for the people who do it as a side hustle or even as like a small business. But I think for, the people who occasionally sell, then I think shelling out the extra just to make sure that it gets there. I guess it really depends on the level of service you want to give your clientele, right? And because I deal in a lot of higher end stuff, it's always going to be worth the extra amount on my end, just because they come back to me for future sales, right? Whereas if you're going through like a TCG player or an eBay, and you're just doing bulk sales, in that case, it's like using the cheapest option. And if something happens, you either eat the cost, or if there's like a little bit of insurance on it, then, you take that insurance. But, even recently though, the USPS, because there's been some bottlenecks in kind of the whole staffing of them and, whatnot, and just how prevalent people are using for online orders in general and shipping and stuff, more mistakes are happening more than ever. There are some talks on the subreddit that says that there's some new machinery that's being added to all the post office to be rolled out by 2024, right? That's supposed to machine, pretty much everything quickly and efficiently. So, that's something that we probably be on the lookout for, to see, will the incidents of damaged cards, happening go up or stay the same or go down, as a result of it. We still have to see. But, that's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on to make sure that, the cards arrive to their, destination safely.
Definitely. And speaking of cards arriving safely, as a customer who regularly buys a lot of cards online, every now and then I get that one new reseller or seller who takes a card and they just put it in a top loader, and then they take 4 more top loaders, and then they duct tape it 100 times, and then they wrap it in some bubble wrap and they duct tape that, and then by the time I'm done getting the card out, I might have damaged it just trying to remove it from the insane amount of packaging it has. I've even had stuff where people took a cardboard box and they just took the card and threw it in a cardboard box and taped it and threw it. And that's the opposite end of what I want. But there is a such thing as being over packaged. And what I found is, top loader, making sure that it's sleeved in the top loader, the opening of that sleeve is facing away from the opening, and then some nice, paper tape is usually best because you can just slice it with your finger. I really hate it when people use really tough packaging tape and you have to put a knife on it to open it, and anything that I have to do that could potentially damage the card while I'm getting it out is really annoying, but it also is an unnecessary risk. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, I think the best practice on my end is I take your standard top loader, I double sleeve the card, and these are for cards that are above 50 or $100. I double sleeve the card with a thin inner sleeve and then a regular card sleeve. I put it into the top loader. I take the blue tape that doesn't leave that sticky residue on the top loader, seal it completely with a single piece. If a buyer requests that I have a security mark on it, I'll do that, so that way people will know if it's been tampered with, especially if I'm selling internationally. I get that request sometimes. And then other than that, having it in a padded envelope and sending it on its way. And, I've had no problems with that ever. I'll continue to do that. And even as a buyer, when I get a top loader, I make sure to save it and, recycle it and use it in the things that I sell.
Yeah, I recycle everything. I keep every top loader, any outer packaging that I can save and reuse, I do. And if anybody's looking for a good option, again, we're not affiliated with them or sponsored or anything, but Eco Enclose is a really great company that uses recycled materials to make packaging. All of their packages are reusable, which means they have multiple seals, and all of their packaging is recyclable. I've had really good success with them. And then you might have noticed, Grant, that there was a big shortage of top loaders throughout the pandemic. And there's been some really cool alternatives that have popped up that are card-based, or rather cardboard-based, that are rigid, that are secure, and they're actually cheaper than top loaders, which is awesome because they'll eventually biodegrade. And, if you just throw them straight in trash, it's not a big deal, but you can reuse them.
And speaking of which, I think one of the interesting things is, like, will the opinion of the buyers change over time, right? Because we definitely saw some pushback as some big online stores moved to this semi-rigid cardboard way of shipping cards. But the resounding response from the community is, we don't want this. We don't think it protects our card as well as a top loader. And then it's like, what do you do as that company, right? Because you've committed to, some large quantity of that way of shipping it. And even though you send out a survey that says, like, just straight, how did your card arrive? Like, were there any discrepancies in what you thought you bought and whatnot? And, everybody's like, this, the protection is the same as a top loader. It's just the expectation of the buyer hasn't quite shifted to accept that. And I think part of that is, like, some online communities like Troll and Toad, for example, have used, like, this semi-rigid envelope in the past, but also threw the card in, like, a penny sleeve or sometimes not a sleeve at all. And the card surface definitely gets to, a questionable shifting around in that, envelope state. So I don't know if that has any bearing on it, but, is this something where, as a consumer, do you have to move the goalposts and say, like, this is an acceptable way to receive my cards? Or as the seller, like, do you just have to say, all right, I'm going to have to succumb to the, pressure that I'm getting online, that people feel like the card's not as protected, even though it is?
So it's a hybrid approach, right? The card still needs to be in a sleeve because it still needs to have its surface protected. But the rigid envelopes that I'm talking about are literally just the size of a top loader. So you sleeve it, you put it in there, you can even tuck it shut, or you can put a little piece of tape on it. It actually closes over the top, so it protects it a little bit better than a top loader would. And then that goes into either a mailer or cardboard mailer or something else. So it's not just like floating around in there with just a piece of cardboard. But I see what you're saying. I know TCG Player had been trying to do some type of, like, rigid shipping structure where it creates like a pocket for the cards to go in. Every time I've gotten those, they've been just destroyed because they're not rigid enough, and that's been a problem. But it looks like we're running up against the end of our time here. So, Grant, where can our viewers and listeners find you?
You can find me on Instagram or Facebook. I'm at Chuggy_Bear.
And to get in touch with us, see the episode description or head over to ambergrading.com/TCG Compass. We'd love to hear from you.
That's our show for today. Thanks for joining us on the TCG Compass podcast. I've been your co-host, Chuggy.
And I've been your host, Daniel. We'll see you next time.
This has been the TCG Compass podcast, presented by Amber Grading. Thanks for listening. You can find us at ambergrading.com/TCG Compass. At Amber Grading on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or drop us an email, tcgcompass@ambergrading.com.